Let's have a discussion about not being part of the clique at work. Hi, my name is Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed therapist. I've been counseling men and women who have been victims and or perpetrators of abuse for many years now. I made a post about, sometimes you're not part of the cool crowd, part of the clique in your own family. And this commenter says, let's talk about it at work and how to go over that. I think, I'm 45. I'll be 46 in September. So at my age, this is coming from me at my age. At my age now, I would say my first recommendation is to not become part of a clique. I think there's also going to be a difference in how you approach this if you have a job. If you're working a job versus if you're working in a career. If you're working in a job, it's not that big of a deal, and I can understand why you do it. Like many years ago when I worked at the grocery stores and things like that, I sure enough was clicked up, and that thing was like fun and games, and it got me through my work days. But now that I have a professional career, I wouldn't advise clicking up. And I wouldn't advise clicking up because people who you surround yourself with are always going to be associated with you. And that means that their reputation and all of that is always going to be associated with you. So I personally don't recommend being part of the clique. And I get that there's also, sometimes, again, there's mean girl, mean guy combo cliques at your job that sort of want to team up and gossip and fodder and all that kind of stuff. Again, I think this is going to be approached differently based on whether or not you're in a career or if you're in a job. If you're, I'm trying to think about for me, like when you're in a career and you have you have status, you have reputation and things like that. I feel like there's not a whole lot that you have to worry about outside of the psychological stress. I think it also depends too on how much you want to emotionally invest in your job and just the BS that kind of goes on back and forth. So if this is just a job for you, if this is just a paycheck for you, you show up, you do your 8 and skate. It's kind of how I call it, unless you do 10 or 12-hour shifts. But even then, you just kind of show up and you skate. But doctors, nurses, and other clinicians and things like that. That kind of stuff didn't really matter to me. Once I had a career, like I just was like in and out. And in my last career in corrections, were there people that sort of, there were people that sort of had this like gang and cliquish and gossip and stuff like that. I didn't really care unless they kind of confronted me with it. And then once it was a confrontation, because I think a lot of people chatter and they talk stuff and they kind of do this stuff behind your back. But I have very seldom seen people have liquid courage when it comes to, saying what they have to say to your face. And so I will say that I've maybe encountered this twice, and usually then I address it head on, and then people sort of, scampered in different directions. And it's just because I don't think they were really expecting me to address that sort of thing and like let them know what time it was. Like you guys are out of pocket, and so, I said, you need to come to work and blah, 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 and I go a little bit about this on my previous post. But so I would say, you could sort of, if you're invested as much or if it comes to your face, then you can address it. But otherwise, I kind of just, my recommendation is always just to do your thing and go home. You don't really need to invest, and it's even better if you work from home. But if you have some things where your job has like, so I've worked a lot with tech, and a lot of tech companies have it to where you can work from anywhere. So you could work from home. You could work from another location sometimes. take advantage of those things. Get out of the office and just sort of move around a little bit and have a life that's exciting outside of work, so that you're not too emotionally invested in the dumb stuff that people have going on over there. And, I always avoid people at work, generally speaking, unless we actually have to work together, so that's kind of the thing. And I did make the mistake of having one friend, and I said mistake because I found out very quickly how this friend was, sort of doing things that were inappropriate. But I think my reputation at work sort of stands for itself. And so there wasn't a whole lot of ganging up on that. But for you, if there is a whole lot of ganging up on you, I would say if you feel, I would get consultation and mentorship and see if it's something that you should address. And that ideally that consultation needs to come from somebody that you trust and who gives sound advice. And then see what to do from there, to address gossip, to address fodder. But if it's not going to make or break your day, if it's not going to affect your paycheck, because sometimes it can be coming from a supervisor, but if it's not going to be affecting that, I would just get your check and go home and I wouldn't really personally engage in that and not worry about who's cool and who's not. It's only going to be a matter of time before they fall out with each other anyway, because if they're talking about other people, if they're creating chaos, what do you think is going to eventually happen within their own group? Now, if it's a supervisor, I would definitely, if it affects your money, if it affects bias, if it causes bias and things like that, I would definitely, see who you can consult with and make a report about that if it's going to help, reporting it above to HR, chain of command and all that kind of stuff. In my experience, when people have done that, it usually has not fared well. And so when that kind of stuff happens, you may need to move around, find someplace else to go if you need to. Otherwise, I would just kind of let it be and let it go. Just let it fly unless it causes a safety risk. And then there's confrontation is unavoidable. But if that's the case, when you have to confront somebody, what I've done when I've had to confront somebody that got inappropriate with me is I went ahead and had the confrontation. I had it. I did. And I said what needed to be said, and I said it in front of everybody. And then, I went ahead and I reported it to my manager, and I said, I just want to let you know, because if this person comes back to me, professionalism is off the table, because now that they've taken things way too far. And so usually that works. So I'll just kind of tell myself in that way, and I'll say, A, B, C, D, and E over there saw it, and they saw how it went down, and I just want to let you know they did that to me, and I feel uncomfortable and scared, and so I have to defend myself. That's kind of how it goes. I'll tell them I feel, use those big emotional words. I feel scared, and that seems to resonate with people. And so, yeah, that's kind of how that goes. But, if it's a job, and people are sort of gossiping and things like that, if it's a job, you can benefit, if you don't need your job, a lot of people are in need of their job now. If you need it, I would just let it fly, and just kind of do what you need to do and get out. If you don't need their job, then you could certainly address people head on and then go and be done with it. I've certainly worked a number of jobs where people have done that, not with me, but certainly with their managers and things like that, where it's just been like, hey, this is what it is. I don't appreciate it, and I'm letting everybody know what time it is. But I hope that helps. And so I think there's so many different scenarios and how it can go for one in just your own scenario in terms of where you're at professionally with your job and financially, right? Can you afford to leave your job, if things get squirrely, that kind of stuff. And two, you got to work around these people. So I would say if you feel okay, addressing that, then fine. But if not, it's not going to make or break your day, then go home and call it a day and just leave work, crap at work. Hope this helps. Like, comment, follow, and share. Love to hear what you guys think about this. Thanks so much.